right. So, a bridge code of Jewish law, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, chapter 102. And we're discussing Erev Tavshilin. So just to refresh everyone's memory. In concept, we can prepare on Yom Tov for Shabbos. Right? We can't prepare on Yom Tov for the weekday that follows the Shabbos because the weekday is a lower level of holiness. But Shabbos, which is Robert, you have a question? You're on mute.
I apologize for interrupting your introduction, but after yesterday's class, I sort of went back and rethought some of what we discussed and were studied. And I never really took it, I always took it for granted, but there's got to be a significance. Bread, every time, when we discuss eating, there's always a substantial portion of bread that's part of the process.
Yes.
For the bracha that does that. So the basis for that is because bread is the sustenance of life, and because hamotzi is important, you should have bread with every meal. Just sort of, thinking all of that through. It just sort of, never really dawned on me that we are a bread-eating people, right? And its significance both culturally as well as religiously, I guess is what I'm trying to articulate.
Yeah. And all our blessings come through the blessings of benching. The problem is today, without getting too sidetracked, most of what's sold as bread is not really bread anymore.
That's for sure.
It's a processed mix of who knows what. So it could be most of the bread that there is today. Its benefits aren't that great and might be best to avoid. But if you have, some really good, wholesome, natural, I guess it doesn't have to be sourdough. There's, using the yeast to cheat doesn't necessarily, but a lot of the heavily processed, but the truth is not just bread. A lot of the heavily processed foods we have today, there's not really a lot of nutrition in them. But that's another story. Yeah. So yes, bread is the staple, and in concept,
it's an element of our life as Jews because of its significance.
Yep.
Okay.
And in concept, there should be bread with the meals. Yep. So we were saying that we can only do something on Yom Tov for a higher level of holiness, or same level. So we can cook on first day Yom Tov for first day Yom Tov. It's the same level of holiness. So if Shabbos follows Yom Tov, we can do whatever we need to do. However, our sages, and by sages, we don't mean Rabbi whoever it was last week. We talking about from biblical times already. Had a concern that there may be people who won't understand. They'll think, this year I prepared on Shabbos, on Yom Tov, for after Yom Tov. Now, it happened to be Shabbos, but they weren't paying attention to that, or they didn't realize that was the reason. And they could mistakenly come to the belief that you're allowed to prepare on Yom Tov for after Yom Tov. And then the next year, when it's a regular weekday after Yom Tov, they'll prepare on Yom Tov for after Yom Tov also, and that's problematic. So we had this whole process of Erev Tavshilin, and so we need to take two types of food, a baked food and a dish, and we say a blessing on it, and so to speak. Now these foods they're already like the beginning of our Shabbos preparations, so that allows us to prepare. Now rabbinically allows us to prepare on Yom Tov for Shabbos. So number 3, I think we started number 3, but we're in the middle, so we'll start the beginning and we'll work our way through. Ein Erev Tavshilin moyel el lahati lasses kotzech Shabbos b'Yom Tov b'Olam Gadol. The Erev Tavshilin only helps. It only allows us to prepare on Yom Tov for Shabbos early in the day. When you made the Erev earlier, meaning.
Where are you? Simon Gimel?
Sif Gimel, yeah.
Oh, because we didn't even do.
Oh, we're in the middle of base?
I think
I know we're in the middle of one.
you started. I have Yontif Shechol Lios Be'er Shabbos. You just finished one, where they have all the different languages. They even have in the version I have here in Yiddish how you should say make the bracha.
Yeah, so we definitely
and that's where we stopped right there. So I still have it on my screen.
Oh, so it was two. It was base. Sorry, it was base that we started. We started and we got a little bit in, so we'll start again. All right. All right. My apologies. Number 2.
That's okay.
Now, the cooked food that we have is the kind of food that you normally eat with bread at a meal. Going, for example, bossa, we have meat, so I just let someone in. It was bossa, meat, dogim, fish, beitzim, and eggs. Something you don't eat with bread. And we gave an example, like a porridge or something like that. Loy mahani doesn't help. So it needs to be like a main course type meal that's with a bread meal. Now, shira tavshil kazayis, the amount that we need to eat is kazayis. Actually, I think this is where we got up to. So with kazayis, we started to mention that an act of eating is eating kazayis. Now, kazayis literally means like an olive. Now, the species of olive that they were speaking about are larger olives. Normally today we have like these little small olives. You do see larger olives, but it was even larger than some of the larger ones we have today. And it's the volume of the olive, so it includes its pit as well. So even if you had one of those olives, you'd have to eat more than 2 olives to eat an olive size. Right, because the most dense part of the olive is the pit. So that's how much food you need of the food, meaning the meat or the fish or something like that. V'hapas kebeitzen, and the bread should be the size of an egg. Again, it's a volume measurement, and so if you take a nice bread roll, just a regular bread roll, there's no problem. Now, v'yesh lahada achas mana yofa v'chorida mitzvah. Now, you should try and take a generous portion, right? So rather than just, okay, that's the minimum. We need to know the minimum, but, don't start measuring exactly. Let's try and have something, nice, generous size out of honor for the mitzvah. So we should do this mitzvah not just with the barest minimum, but with a, nice, good chunk of something. The gamma pasta shleim, and also the bread should be a whole one, ideally. And you use it on Shabbos for one of your loaves. The sudashlicious yivsoleho, and ideally at the third Shabbos meal. Why the third one? Because this mitzvah that we performed with it, it's good to do another mitzvah with it. So we used it for the Erev, let's use it for a Shabbos meal. So here it mentions the third Shabbos meal. Some people have a custom that they have a little bit of it at each of the 3 Shabbos meals. But the main thing is just you should get eaten on Shabbos, at least some of it. Right? It shouldn't be forgotten about, because then it's not the beginning of Shabbos preparations. So Gimel, number 3. So it's we're just having a repeat episode now. Gimel, Ein Evet Hashilim Moyel Elhatilastos Katzach Shabbos B'Yomtov B'Yom Gadol. Making Evet Hashilim only helps. So literally means if you made it earlier in the day. What's early in the day? Dahainu sheishos b'yom. That there's still enough time in this day on Yontov, Shimhaim is damim le'orchim, that if guests would come, shle'achlo hayom, who had not yet eaten today, hayoichlim, they could eat when the hanbay b'yom and enjoy the food that you're making on that day. Before the onset of twilight, they could eat that food that was prepared for Yontiv on Yontiv before twilight. But if you can't, there's not enough time to benefit. doesn't help you. So let's explain this. So what we're saying like this. So we're putting in a second precautionary measure. First precautionary measure is that we do this Erev Tavshilin ceremony. So we realize, oh, you know why I'm allowed to cook on Yom Tov for tomorrow? Because tomorrow's Shabbos. Not because you can cook afterwards. You can't. Only for Shabbos. Good. So that's precautionary step number one. Precautionary step number two is like this. Don't think because you're cooking for Shabbos means that normally what happens, especially in winter, we're in a mad rush, and you put on your cholent about in the crock pot, I don't know, half an hour before Shabbos, right? The food you're going to eat Friday night, you actually have to put on quite a bit before, because it has to be at least a third cooked before twilight. The third you can eat tomorrow is not so much of an issue. So your cholent, yes, you whack in the crock pot, 5 minutes before. So that might help on a regular Shabbos. But on Yom Tov, it doesn't help us. Why? We want to cook when we're cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbos, we want to cook it early enough that it would be ready on time, that you could still feed a guest. If you had, theoretically, someone popped in and they hadn't eaten yet today, the food would be ready in time to feed it to them. So let's say the chicken takes an hour to cook, let's just say. So we need to cook it a little over an hour, let's say an hour and 15 minutes before the twilight. That way it can be cooked and it's time for someone to eat a piece of chicken before the twilight happens. So that's the second precaution. So we're making sure we realize we're only able to cook for Shabbos, but theoretically you could even use it for Yom Tov if the need arose. So it's Yom Tov available. So it's almost like we partially cooked it for Yom Tov. So that's the second precaution that we make. But and therefore, Nahagin, we are accustomed to Shechol Yom Tov Be'erev Shabbos. So when Yom Tov falls out on the Friday, that we bring in Shabbos a little bit early. Some people, so that way, she was risen Lamar Ligmoy Hakol Kodim She'omrim Mizmor Shel Yom Shabbos. That way, everyone has finished all the Shabbos preparations before we say the Mizmor Shel Yom Shabbos, which is at that point in the Kabbalah Shabbos, if you bring in Shabbos early, you bring in Shabbos by saying that. So so many people have the custom to bring Shabbos a little bit early, and by doing this, it makes sure that everyone has done everything earlier, while it was still day, and so that helps them get around this. And therefore, the food that you set aside for Shabbos, has to be ready quite early because you bring Shabbos early, so the food has to be ready even earlier. And everything will be at least a third cooked well before sunset, well before the twilight period, and it's all going to be done. So, probably most of us or some of us don't set the times now, sure, what time they daven. So maybe this last point isn't so relevant to us, but the idea behind it that we should, when Friday, when we're cooking for Shabbos, when Friday is Yom Tov, we should have the food ready early enough that it could be eaten if necessary on Yom Tov. Okay, Daled, number 4. Now, when we say that you can bake and cook on Yom Tov, this is only on Erev Shabbos, on Friday. If Yom Tov falls out on Thursday and Friday, you can't cook on Thursday or Shabbos. You can only cook on the Friday. Number 5. Hey, if there's any question at any time, don't hesitate to ask. Sarchia Erev Kayim Ad Shehachin Sarchia Shabbos. Now the Erev still has to exist when you plan to cook for Shabbos. So let's say you had Thursday, Friday, Yom. Let's use an example. So I made my Erev Wednesday afternoon. Let's say it was Wednesday night. Thursday, Friday is Yom Tov. Friday afternoon or early afternoon, I'm going to start cooking for Shabbos, and the Erev is gone. Gone means one of the kids ate it. I don't know, it got lost. You know, I don't know. The dog ate my homework. Well, whatever happened to be, right? It's gone. So now what? So this Erev Toshilin only helps us if it's still in existence. Now, im nevdo, if it's got lost somewhere, oy nacheles apas, or someone ate the bread, then it's useless. Okay, a mutter afil afos. So then we can't even bake. Sorry, you can't bake. You can bake if the baked food is gone. But if the cooked part of the food is gone, the meat in the shekazayis, if there's at least a kazayis, this olive size measure that still exists, then you can. Gam ken lehefsid is also not totally lost. So if the bread part of the Erev is gone, it doesn't matter. You can still bake. If the cooked part, as long as there's a kazayis, you can still cook. But if there's not even a kazayis, there's not anything. There's one crumb of meat left. Now they ate the schnitzel and they left a few crumbs from the whatever. Also lavashel, then you can't cook. Kilo Erev klal, it's like he didn't make an Erev at all. It doesn't exist anymore. So the Kaitzad Oisa Mi Shaloi Erev. So what does someone do if they don't have an Erev? Either because disappeared or didn't make it. Well, now what do you do? Okay, so it's going to depend. We've got a few possibilities of how to fix this up. Imloi Niska ad achasudas shachris. If you only realize after Yom Tov lunch, okay, calls it the morning meal. Because, I guess you meant to daven early. Most of us in Yom Tov, Shabbos and Yom Tov, we daven a little bit later than during the week. But anyway, if we remember after lunch, and there's no other Jew made an Erev. So what we're going to mention later is that for some reason you don't have an Erev, you can rely on someone else's once. Right? Now the once, we give you a break. Once after it comes multiple times, and it's your bad luck. You're meant to have taken care of this. But once you get a break, so there's no other Jew around who made an Erev. You can only cook one pot, right? Because as we said, you can cook. When we were talking about from first day to second day Yom Tov. So let's say you were cooking on first day Yom Tov, and let's say you probably need 6 pieces of chicken. So if you throw in 10, and but it's all in the one pot at once. So when you put the pot on the fire, on the hot plate, wherever it is, it really didn't matter whether it was 5 pieces, 10 pieces, 50 pieces. So it's the same job of putting the pot once on the fire. So then you can, if you need to, you can do that. So here we can do the same thing. You can do one pot, because you could still eat in the afternoon, even though you've had your lunch. But some people like an afternoon snack. You're allowed to eat in the afternoon. So as long as I put it on once, so I can put enough for Shabbos as well. And I can do one lot of baking. So again, this means putting in the oven once. So you cook, like I guess 1 loaf type thing. So put in there. The Shabbos, you can light 1 candle. The Shabbos. Again, because you need some light. It's starting to get dark in the afternoon. You're allowed to put some light. So you can do that. So all of that, you do it as if as if you're doing for Yom Tov, and you have something done for Shabbos. That's if you didn't remember until after lunch. But if you remember before lunch, you can make whatever you like, and you just add for Shabbos. So now you're making kugel, good. 2 kugels. You're making the chicken, double it. You're making, I don't know, whatever else you're doing. Boiling some eggs for an egg salad, doesn't matter. There's many dishes, many pots. As long as you're going to have some of it at the Yom Tov meal, you can make as much else as you need for Shabbos. Now, if there's someone else who made an Erev, so now even if you've it's after lunch, you've forgotten. You give them a gift. If so, so what you do, you give them a gift like flour, some meat, some other ingredients. And the one who has the Erev, he acquires these items, and he can cook and bake it. You can even do it in your house. So if you live in a Jewish neighborhood, and your next door neighbor, let's say he made an Erev, so you call him in, and you tell him you forgot to make an Erev, and all this chicken's yours now. Oh, it's my chicken? Good. I don't like raw chicken. So let's put it in the oven then. Right? And he can do all these things, whatever you need to do. And he can do it because he's made an Erev. So if the Erev got lost or eaten by mistake, so if he remembers or realizes before the lunch meal on that day Yom Tov, he just cooks whatever he's cooking for lunch and makes much more, and he has that for Shabbos. If he remembers after lunch, so he can only cook 1 pot, 1 loaf. I can do 1 act of cooking that he can have some. In theory, if he wanted to, he can have some on Yom Tov, and then he can have Shabbos. Or if he has a neighbor that made an Erev, he can gift it to the neighbor, and the neighbor can cook it. And that's what we can do. Okay. So, any questions on that? All right. Number 6 then. Now, every household has to make its own Erev of Shilin. So when we make an Erev for a city, maybe everyone chips in or different things, but, there's one Erev. The time Erev talking about for carrying different things. But over here, every individual household has to have their own Erev of Shilin to cook for Yom Tov. Now, v'afilu isha she'ein la bal, even if there's a lady that doesn't have a husband, so normally the head of the household makes it. In this case, she's the head of the household. Im yodas, if she knows about it, mechayavis lasis batzma. She knows about it. She knows how to do it, I should say. She knows how to do it, then she should make it herself. And she shouldn't rely on the Erev of the head of the city. Now, normally, so we're going to mention that people, as we said, people rely on someone else's once can rely on the rabbi, the head of the city, or wherever it happens to be. So if she knows how to do it, she should do it herself. Now, someone forgot. So there's different types of forgetting. First, we're going to speak about someone who forgot due to unavoidable circumstances. So he didn't do it. They had to rush someone to the hospital, God forbid. They were cooking, they burnt themselves, nothing serious, but ended up, by the time you walked back from the hospital, it was Yom Tov, you walked around the hospital, it was not Erev Shilin. So it was an onus, it was something that was unavoidable. It wasn't laziness or just I'll do it later, and never get around to it. Something happened. And then and he didn't make it. Or he did make one and it got lost. It fell on the floor and the dog chewed it. So then, if there's someone in the city who makes for all the city, so we like normally the rabbi of the city should do that. He should have in mind that he's making the eruv for everyone, and just says in the brackets, know what he's doing on behalf of everyone. Then you can rely on that person's eruv. But if he didn't do it because he was lazy, or he just said, I'm just going to rely on the rabbis, I'm not making one myself. It doesn't help him. And he can only do what we said in the previous one. He can only cook that one pot, or he has to cook extra at lunchtime, whatever happens to be. So if someone didn't do it for a good reason, or an honest mistake, totally forgot, it's just one of those things, then you can rely. But otherwise, he's stuck. Yeah, Mordechai.
Hold on a second. Wait a moment. Okay. Yes, I remember, like many years ago, near the beginning of my marriage, there was one time I had begun to make an eruv tafshilin, and I went over to, I guess it may have been Rob Marlowe, and he asked me whether I had ever forgotten to make an eruv before, and I said no, and he said, in that case, I can't rely on his. I guess the implication was that if it had happened to me before, and this is the second time, then that would be considered negligence.
Correct. So particularly when you're first marrying these things, you're not used to doing it. So we mentioned before, we give everyone a break. Everyone gets a break once. Again, as long as that wasn't because, I'm going to do it later, and then it doesn't happen. But sometimes, that's, like I said, the example you gave when you first married, and till then I've been relying on my parents or whoever else is doing, and all of a sudden, the problem is if you're the rabbi and you forget, then who are you going to rely on? That's another story. So now we know you were married before 2000. I think this one Ramallah passed away. I think it's 2000 it was. So good man. All right, Zayin, number 7. Even though it means we're going to drop over time, but let's finish the chapter. Imchal Yonta b'yom chamishi b'yom shishi. Yonta falls out Thursday and Friday. V'nizka b'yom chamishi shlo asa erev tavshilin. It remembers on Thursday I didn't make an erev tavshilin, so it's already Yontav, but first day Yontav. Yachol asa is hayom. He can make it that day. V'yavarach es a bracha, and he can make a bracha. V'achakach yoma, and he said afterwards he says like this. There's a slightly different formula. Im hayom kodesh. If this is the real Yontav, first day, ain't it tzarach lasses erev? Well, I don't need to make an erev. So Friday is not a problem. Vim hayom chol. But if today is the real weekday and tomorrow is the real Yontav, then ba'dain aruva cholu, he says all the things he normally says, because on a certain level, even though today truth is both days Yontav, but on a certain level that idea exists, so he can get away with that. But Rosh Hashanah, they said Rosh Hashanah only gets, when it comes one long day, is only to make it stricter, not to make it lenient. He can't do this in Rosh Hashanah, but all the other Yom Tovim he can. All right, that's the chapter. Any questions on Erev Tavshilin? Is this year Pesach? Pesach is Shabbos. No, it's Friday Shabbos, second night Shabbos.
Yeah, it's Thursday and Friday. So So I guess that means
Thursday,
that this-
Friday?
Yeah.
Right. So this year, this will be the next time you have to think about it. And now I've made it worse for you because now you have to remember, because you can't, now that you learned about it, you can't say you didn't know and you don't rely on the rabbi. Now you have to do it. All right. So wish everyone a wonderful week. And next
Thank you,
week,
Rabbi.
next week we do have, and it's a week after we don't have is winter break, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll work next week. Yeah, we still have next week. Good. I was going to wish everyone, no, we still have next week. God willing. All right. So take care.
Thank you, Rabbi.
See everyone
Thank
next
you.
week. God willing.
Thank you.
Everybody.